everyone. I hope that you're all well. We'll start the way into this session, if that's okay with everyone, which is based this morning on Canvas quizzes. So my hope is to run through the process of creating a quiz, but also how to make quizzes available, ensure the integrity of quizzes, use item banks, and also ensure that kind of students are getting their marks from quizzes when you want them to. So in terms of the session today, we'll be looking at setting up a quiz, settings for security and integrity, item banks and randomization, how to allow additional time for students, and then additional steps in terms of moderating, marking, so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump straight into the process of creating a quiz. And the way that you can create a quiz inside in Canvas is very simply to enter into your module and look for the quizzes item over in the left-hand menu. And this will bring you to the list of quizzes, which you already have in your module. To create a new quiz, you simply click on the blue plus quiz button up here. Now, this prompt might appear. Basically, there are two kind of quiz engines in Canvas, this classic quizzes and new quizzes. We would strongly recommend that you go with new quizzes for the simple reason that classic quizzes is basically on the way out. Canvas will be removing kind of this from the system over the next period. So using classic quizzes, basically, we recommend that you select new quizzes, mainly just to kind of keep consistency of student experience, but also as well, so that everyone is used to new quizzes, so that everyone is kind of using this system, so that if this disappears, nobody is left in the lurch. So when you've selected this, you can also, if you want to, remember your choice for this module and press submit, and that will bring you to the first quiz creation screen. So this is kind of a standard enough process. You can simply give the quiz a quiz name. You can identify how many points it's worth. You generally don't have to worry about any of the settings in terms of the group, the display grade, and the submission type is automatically selected. So there's nothing to do there. You can decide if you want to whether to assign it to everyone, which is the default setting, or if you wanted to make it available to specific sections or groups of students, that would typically be a CRN, or specific individual students. But for the most part, everyone is the default setting, and that's usually what you want. If you want to, you can set a due date for the quiz. This isn't something, in most instances of a quiz, this isn't something which is kind of critical. But if you want to, you can say, okay, well, everyone should have this done by Friday at 12. The other element in terms of the quiz, though, and something which is generally quite important, is the available from and the until date. And this determines when students have access to the quiz. So it is available from Friday at 10, and that means they won't be able to access it until after that date and time has passed. And the until date then determines when students no longer have access to it. So we might set that, for instance, to 12:15. Now, I guess why this is of relevance is that for most instances of a quiz, generally, you would like all students to only be able to access it after a certain time, and you want them all to be finished it by a particular point. So I guess in terms of, let's say, the equivalent in a real life classroom is I have printouts on paper that I want of a quiz that I want students to complete. I'm going to hand all of these out on Friday at 10, and I'm going to get them all back from students on Friday at 12. So generally, this is why the available from and until is important. And I guess the until is important as well, because after this date and time has passed, the quiz automatically closes for students. So it doesn't matter whether they're halfway through, they're entirely through. When this date and time passes, the quiz no longer becomes available to them. And I guess that is important just as a way of ensuring consistency and integrity of the quiz for all the students. So it is maybe to be aware of the impact this has. The due date in this instance doesn't really matter too much. It's the available from and until that determines when the quiz is available. At the bottom of the page, then, there are a number of options in terms of saving and publishing, saving and building. Now, if I, for the most part, the button that I'm going to click is build, because that brings us through to the process of actually creating the quiz. And when I press build, that brings me through to the quiz kind of building environment. So you can see the interface changes a little bit compared to the normal kind of Canvas interface. If I want to get back to the main kind of Canvas module, all I do is I click on the return button up in the top right corner here, and that brings me back into my module, and we can see there that the quiz that I've created is inside there. And I guess the difference here is that if I want to make any changes to this quiz, whether that's adding questions or whether I decided, okay, actually I'm going to push it back to the following Friday, what I do is I simply click into the quiz, and that brings me back to this initial quiz creation screen. Now, let's say I don't need to add any questions or make any changes to the questions in the quiz. I just want to change this from the 15th to the 22nd. So if I'm happy enough with that, I can click save, and that will bring me back into the main, that will bring me back into the main kind of Canvas area. But for the most part, if we want to kind of change the questions that we're using, we just click into the quiz and we click on the build item. And that brings us through to the screen where we can actually begin adding questions. So in terms of quiz questions, the way in which we can do it, if we want to, we can change the title here, or we can add instructions here. But for the most part, students understand how these kind of things work. And the quiz system is designed to kind of just, walk them through it in a fairly straightforward fashion. When I want to add a question, I simply click on this blue kind of plus icon here for add content, and that will bring up a list of the different types of quiz questions that I can add into my quiz here. Now, there's any number of different kind of way, like obviously we won't have time in this session to go through all of the different quiz questions, but each of them, most quiz questions are kind of generally quite straightforward, but each might have, slightly different options compared to another one. So for example, if I select a multiple choice quiz, I can give the quiz a title here. And when I say a title, this is just an identifier for me. So I might just say question on capital. The question stand then is the question which will appear to students. So this is the actual question that kind of students will see. So I might say, what is the real capital? And in here, then I can add the answers that I want presented to students. There's 4 in here at the moment. If I want to add a 5th option for them, I can click answer here, and that will add in an additional answer. If I want to get rid of answers, I simply click on the trash icon over to the right-hand side here. So I'm just going to have 2 options here, and I am going to say Cork, and I'm going to say Dublin. Now, obviously, the correct answer is the first one. So I can switch which answer is correct by clicking on the little kind of checkbox to the left-hand side of the question here or here. And obviously, we're going to leave it as the correct answer. There's a number of additional options then in the kind of area beneath the kind of quiz questions, or beneath the answers presented to students. For the most part, you won't really have to worry too much about these. There's nothing kind of major. Generally, for most questions, you're not going to need an on-screen calculator. If you want to, you can shuffle the choices, which determines, randomizes the order in which kind of questions are presented. Generally, you wouldn't vary points by answer. That identifies that kind of, okay, if they get this correct, it's, for example, 2 points. If they select this, it's 1 point, so on and so forth. So for the most part, you don't really have to worry about any of the options there. One thing which may be of interest, however, is the ability to add questions to item banks. So what you can do is when I am adding a question to a particular quiz, what I can do is I can click on the item bank option here, and I can identify that I want to add this question to a bank. And item banks essentially are simply just collections of quiz questions that I can pull from when I wish to. So if I've already set up an item bank, I can select existing item bank and add it in there, or I can select a new item bank. I'm going to say questions about Ireland, and I'm going to click add. And that then creates a new item bank, adds this question to it, and I can pull that question in or pull questions from that item bank when I wish to. Now, one other just option to be aware of just in terms of when I add a question to a bank is if I want to change that question afterwards, I'm going to have to edit it in bank. So if I want to make a change to this pop-up will appear. It's not particularly important. It just means that you are editing the question within the item bank. So whatever changes I make here that will persist with that question. Anytime I want to use this question again, the changes I make aren't just going to be in this quiz, they're going to be anytime I wish to use this question, anytime I wish to pull it from an item bank. So you can make the change that you want to the quiz, and you can, when you're happy, press done. Now, one other feature just to be aware of with particularly multiple choice questions is also the ability to add feedback to students depending on what answer they select. So for example, they might say Dublin, and if I want to, I can click on the speech bubble over on the right hand side, and I can say you are incorrect, Cork. So this is a useful way of being able to kind of provide students with additional feedback or additional information depending on the answers they correct. If, for example, they select Galway, then I can add feedback to identify to them that is incorrect. And if I want to, I can add in images, I can add in media, I can add in links. So for example, I might put in a link to send them to a resource which kind of provides additional information based on their selection or based on their incorrect selection. So if this was a proper question, I would, for instance, be able to offer feedback against the different answers to say, so that if a student selects incorrectly, they're provided when they're reviewing their quiz attempt with a link to kind of say, that is incorrect. Here is where you can learn more about this particular topic or about this particular subject. So that's a useful feature which is available in for multiple choice questions and for additional kind of questions in the quiz. Anytime I want to add another quiz, I can do so by simply clicking on that same icon. So for example, I might select to add an essay question. So again, I'm going to give it a title, essay question. I'm going to add in a question stem. So why is Cork the real capital? You can see here that some of the options are quite different compared to the multiple choice quiz. There's always going to be some differences. Some are going to remain the same. So for example, there's typically an option to add in on-screen calculator. But for an essay question, if I want to, I can identify that I want to set a word limit. So that means students can only have a certain amount of characters to answer with. And I can also identify if I want to let them use the rich content editor, which would basically just give them the option to bring in images and links and tables and so on and so forth. And again, the option for me to add that to my item bank is available. And I can do that by simply clicking add to bank. I can select my existing item bank. So I think we call it questions about Ireland, and you can see there that appears, it's added to the item bank, so on and so forth. And in this way, you can add as many questions as you wish to your quiz, as well as adding feedback. So for example, in the essay question, there's also the option to add feedback to essay questions as well. Again, simply by clicking on the options available and looking to add feedback items to that. Now, an additional benefit to being able to use quiz banks is the ability to basically draw on questions from quiz banks. So if I have an item bank that I have, that I know has a number of questions which might be relevant for this particular module, what I can do is I can click on the add content button, and over up here, I can click on this piggy bank icon. And what that does, it basically gives me access to my item banks. Now, it immediately brings up the one about questions for Ireland. But if I want to use a different item bank, I simply click on the item bank option up here, and all of the banks that are available to me are going to appear in here. So I'm going to look for an item bank called test quiz. And I'm going to select this one here. So I'm going to click on that. And that's going to provide me with the questions that are inside in that item bank. Now, if I want to, what I can do is I can add those questions one by one simply by clicking on the blue plus icon here. You can see over on the left-hand side that has added that question into that quiz. But another very useful feature is the ability for me to add all of these questions into the quiz. So if I click this all/random button, you can see here back in the quiz on the left-hand side, we've set up question 1, 2, 3. When I bring in that quiz bank, because I've selected all/random, this now represents questions 4 to 8. So because there are 5 questions in that item bank that I brought in, there's 5 questions now been added to the quiz. If I click on the kind of this area here for the particular item bank, there's a number of options available to me here. If I wish to, I can use all questions. So that would be, for example, presenting all 5 questions in that item bank to students. But quite a useful feature is the ability for me to click randomly select questions. And that allows me to identify the number of questions that I want to use. So for example, I don't want to use all 5 questions here, but I do want to kind of draw on that pool of questions to pull in, let's say, 2 random questions from that item bank. So what I'm going to do is under number of questions, I'm going to put in 2. So there's 5 questions in that item bank. I just want to pull 2 questions out of that item bank at random and present those to students. And when I select that and press done, you can see here that this now identifies questions 4 to 5. Now, why that is useful is because basically, let's say if I want, if I have a large item bank, if I have an item bank that has 100 questions, and I just want to pull in, let's say, 5 questions out of that 100 for a particular quiz, what that will do is, depending on each student, it will pull in a different kind of set of questions. So it's going to pull in a random set of questions. So the 5 questions in that item bank that student 1 gets might be different to the 5 questions that student 2 sees, might be different to the 5 questions that student 3 sees. And that's a very useful way of just ensuring the academic integrity of the quiz, and as a way of preventing collusion. So there's no possible, because it's pulling 5 questions from a bank of 100 for each student, it's very unlikely that students are going to get the same questions. And because of that, there really is no potential for them to be able to share answers or kind of inform each other of what's coming up, or so on and so forth. So item banks are kind of a useful tool in terms of being able to save you time and effort in kind of adding questions in, but they also serve a very useful purpose in terms of ensuring that each student taking the quiz gets a different set of questions. They're all drawn from the same item bank, which you have created, but each student is probably going to get different questions, which greatly adds to the academic integrity of the quiz. When I'm happy with all of that, what I can do is I can press done, and the quiz is available. If I want to see what it looks like, I can simply click preview, and that is going to demonstrate to me how the quiz will appear to students. Now, the other key feature in terms of quizzes is this option up at the top here for settings. So this allows you to identify how exactly the quiz should appear to students. The most important setting in all of this is this one down here for restrict student result view. Now, it is kind of essential to turn that on for the simple reason that when this is selected, it basically identifies that students cannot see the results of their quiz, but more importantly, students can't click into the quiz and see what answers they got right and what answers they got wrong. And that would have obvious implications then in terms of any potential for students to share information. So for a student to be able to say, okay, I selected this, that's incorrect. This is the right answer to this particular question. So this is the most important setting in potentially the entire quiz, the ability to restrict student result view. If that's unticked, they can click back into the quiz and they can see what they got right, what they got wrong. So it is essential to have this ticked if at all possible. And you can identify if you wish to, you can kind of adjust kind of what is or is not shown. So I can say, okay, well, I do want them to be able to see the points awarded and the points possible. Or I might say, okay, well, I do want them to be able to see just the feedback to the particular question and what they selected, so on and so forth. So if I was to just show items and questions, students can go back in, but they can only see what answer rather they selected. They're not going to be able to see whether it was correct or incorrect unless I tick this. So I can adjust kind of how much or how little they can see through these options. But generally, for the most part, the most important thing is to make sure that this is ticked. And the less of these that are selected, as a general rule, the less of these that are selected, the more restricted the results are from students. So the other options rather, provide a number of additional useful features. For the most part, there's little to be lost by ensuring that the quiz is shuffling the questions and shuffling the answers. The only thing to be wary of this is, for example, if I had 4 answers and the last one was all of the above. But for the most part, there is a benefit, again, to shuffling the questions and shuffling the answers, just again, as a way of limiting the potential for collusion and ensuring academic integrity. If you want to, you can identify whether questions are selected or presented to students one at a time. If this isn't selected, basically all of the questions are presented as kind of a long scrolling page. So if you wish to, you can again kind of make it more difficult for any kind of possibility of collusion by just presenting questions one at a time, and it just makes the process of I suppose kind of students being able to see all of the questions in the quiz less feasible. Now, one important element is that if you do want to present one question at a time, there is an option for backtracking. And what that basically means is that the student, after they answer a question, can go back, change their answer, so on and so forth before they finish the quiz. If this is unticked, what that basically means is, as a student, I'm going to see one question, I'm going to make my decision as to what I think the correct answer is. And if this isn't ticked, I have no ability, as the student has no ability to go back and to change their answer afterwards. So for example, if I select an answer and it's the incorrect answer, I realize afterwards I have no way to go back. So it's quite a restrictive measure. And for that reason, I would generally always allow backtracking on that basis. If you want to, you can require a student access code, which is simply a passcode you share with students. Anyone who doesn't have the passcode can't get in. For the most part, I wouldn't say this is particularly necessary, but it is an additional security feature if you do want to add it in. You can set a time limit to the quiz, and that can be beneficial. It provides students with, I suppose, a timer within the quiz to identify how long they have to complete the quiz. But it is important maybe to be aware that, again, as we identified earlier, the available from and the unavailable until times in the quiz, that's what determines when the quiz is available and when the quiz is unavailable. So again, going back to that kind of classroom analogy of, I have printouts of the quiz, I distribute them to students at the start of class, let's say 10 o'clock, I get them all back from students at the end of class, let's say 12 o'clock. The available and available from and until times, they're what really determine that. I can set a time limit here, no problem. But if a student doesn't start the quiz until 10:30, it's going to finish at 12, regardless of what this time limit says. So it is important maybe just to be aware that kind of, you can set the time limit, but the available from and until settings is going to override that time limit. If you want to, you can filter IP addresses, which means basically students have to have a particular IP address to be able to take the quiz. Again, I would say this is very much overkill. You can allow the use of a calculator if you want. And if you want to, you can allow multiple attempts. Now, if a quiz is being presented as a summative activity, whereby, they're going to get graded for it, they should only be allowed one kind of attempt at it. You can simply leave this unticked. Again, going back to the classroom analogy, I distribute the printouts at 10, I take them all back at 12. Students don't have the ability to have multiple attempts at the quiz. Where this would differ, however, is if I wanted to present a quiz like as a practice quiz, as something that they can take as a formative activity, as a way of testing their own knowledge, seeing what they got right, what they got wrong, what they did know, what they didn't know. That is when I would allow multiple attempts. And if I am presenting the quiz as, let's say, a test quiz, I would probably change up the settings a bit. I probably wouldn't have a time limit. I would want students to see what was correct or incorrect, what they got correct or incorrect. So I'd show items, show the response, I'd show them feedback, I'd show the correct answer with the incorrect response, so on and so forth. But all of that would be very much dependent on whether I want this quiz to be a formative activity or whether I want it to be a summative activity. After I've done all of that, the quiz generally should be good to go. For the most part, so long as you are restricting student result view, and so long as you are shuffling the questions, the shuffling of the questions and restricting student result view, I would consider those to be the most important options on that screen. If you set the available from and until correctly, and you have ensured that kind of the correct questions are added, those are the two main elements, I would say. Everything kind of in between is kind of more optional and kind of is to your own kind of preference. Although I would say whether one question at a time is ticked or not can have it can affect the experience of taking the quiz for the students quite a bit. Otherwise, when I'm happy with all of that, I can click return to go back to the main Canvas interface. Now, another option which is available is after the students have taken the quiz, if I want to moderate their work, if I want to see what they have or have not done, what I can do is I can, again, simply click into the quiz. I can go down to the bottom of the page and click build. And from inside here, what I can do is I can click into the moderate option. And inside in the moderate option, after students have completed the quiz, I'm going to be able to see how students got on. So a list of all my students is going to appear here. And from here, I can basically see how they got on, see what they got correct. I can step into mark any questions which might need my input in terms of determining whether they're correct or not, so on and so forth. But one useful feature inside here as well is this option to moderate over on the right hand side. So for a particular student, if you click on the moderate button, that gives you additional options in terms of that student's access to the quiz or how they take the quiz. So for example, let's say this student here, he accidentally pressed submit halfway through the quiz, or he had technical issues where he wasn't able to get online and he had to start the quiz late. What I can do if I want to, for example, for that student, if I just want to reopen the quiz for him, all students are only allowed one attempt at the quiz. But for just this specific student, if I want to make the quiz available to him again, what I can do here is I can click on this reopen option. And that will basically allow the student to kind of take the quiz from where they left off. So for example, if he was halfway through the quiz, if he had a number of questions selected, if I reopen it, it will allow the student to complete the quiz. It will retain all of the questions that he answered, and it will allow him to complete the quiz with the remaining time that he had if I set a time limit on the quiz. The other option then is to allow the student an additional attempt. So what that means is kind of, because the student has an additional attempt, very simply, he can go back into the quiz and the option will be there for him to take it fresh. So that is an additional option in terms of an additional attempt. Another option is down here for time adjustments. And what that basically does, it allows me to give a student additional time or to remove the time limit entirely. So one instance where this may be applicable is if you know that a student has been in contact with the DSS office and they may need some, just, if they have an entitlement to some additional kind of time for a particular assessment, I can identify, okay, for just this particular student, I'm going to give them some additional time to complete the quiz. I'm going to give them an additional 20 minutes. And what that will do, you can see here, is that it gives that student an additional 20 minutes to complete the quiz. Now, one important thing I would say in terms of giving additional time is that has to be done before the student takes the quiz. So you can't give a student extra time while they're in the middle of the quiz. You have to add that time to their account before they begin the quiz. For the most part, when students have kind of finished the quiz, what I can do is I can click into their log. What the log does is it basically just gives me kind of a breakdown of, I suppose, how quickly they answered the quiz. So for example, the browser they were using, the operating system they were using, and you can see here, okay, for this question, they answered it, let's say 2 seconds after this question, so on and so forth. So if a student kind of is going through a quiz particularly quickly, the logs can just be useful to identify how quickly they took that particular quiz. But the other element, and probably the most useful element in terms of grading and marking, is under the attempts column. So if I click into the attempts column for this student, basically it will identify to me what questions they got right and what questions they got wrong. So why this is important is because although some quiz questions obviously are automated, if there's a multiple choice question or another form of MCQ or a yes/no question or a matching question, Canvas is able to identify, based on what you said is the correct answer, to identify, okay, the student got this right or the student got this wrong. Other questions, however, like essay questions, they'll obviously require you as a teacher to have some input. So Canvas can't determine whether the response to an essay question is correct or incorrect. It's required that you as the teacher take a look at what the student put down and make a determination if that is acceptable or not acceptable. When you want to identify whether a question is acceptable or unacceptable, what you can do is basically, you can click into the attempt, you can identify the, let's say, the essay question, the response that the student gave, and you can very simply click on this X if you think that that is unacceptable, or the tick if you think it is acceptable. If you select X, they get no points. If you select the tick, they do get points. So that is a quick and easy way of just being able to quickly grade essay questions if you wish to. For any of the questions as well, you can also add in direct feedback to students. So if you've added feedback to the question, that is presented to students automatically when they can see the results of their quiz. But you can also add in you can also add in additional comments here by clicking on this little speech bubble icon. And that gives you the option to add in, again, specific feedback to the students. The other element you can do, if you so wish, is this option at the end to fudge points. So, you know, depending on what Canvas has identified as correct or incorrect, or depending on kind of my interpretation or my kind of marks given against essay questions and the like, if I click update, that is going to kind of update that final score accordingly. If I want to, however, I can manually add additional points or remove points under this fudge points option. So if I want to, let's say, okay, well, actually there was a mistake, or I made a mistake with some questions, so that student should actually have 4 points. I can add in 1 point under fudge points, click update, that brings it up to 4. I can, if I want to, also, I can override the question, a student's kind of question. So for example, let's say I made a mistake in identifying what the correct answer is. I can add in an additional point here if I want to as well, just as a way of adjusting or kind of overriding the system. But for the most part, all you're really going to need to do, Canvas will automatically mark the automated questions like multiple choices or yes/no questions. But for essay questions, it does require me to take a look at what the student has done and simply click on the tick or the X to identify if they got that right or if they got that wrong. And when I press update, all of that is just that, updated. If you want to, you can also print the results of the student work by clicking on the print results button up here. And what that will do is it will create a PDF which has the results of the students' quiz attempt. So essentially it prints out a copy of what we can see here. There are some additional elements then just in terms of reports. So under reports, you can do a quiz and item analysis, and an outcomes analysis. Now I would say neither of those are particularly useful. That's really just kind of, I suppose, analytics about the quiz in terms of, you know, it doesn't provide, it's quite anonymous, I would say, the quiz and the items analysis. It just provides kind of analytics around kind of how many students answered, what the correct response rate was for a particular question, so on and so forth. And outcomes analysis that's not really applicable unless you go to the work of setting up outcomes for this particular module and for this particular quiz, which is something we might touch on another day, but it's not particularly relevant for MTU Cork staff. The other element then is to be aware of, I think, in terms of quizzes, is just kind of the release of marks on quizzes. So when I'm happy enough that students have undertaken the quiz and that I have kind of provided them with feedback effectively, how exactly can we make the work available to students? So if, for example, I act as this as a student, we can see as a student, when I go into the grades area, there is a quiz. There is a quiz which the student has taken, and it's identified that the grades are hidden. So, student comes in here, I as a student have taken the quiz, but I can see the marks are not yet available for it because the instructor has not posted this grade. Now, the most important thing in terms of kind of students being able to see the results of their quiz, even after it's been graded, is basically the grade posting policy. So if we click into the grades area, the grade posting policy determines whether marks and feedback are automatically made available to students when I enter in their marks and their feedback, or whether it kind of hides them until I explicitly tell the Canvas system, okay, make marks and feedback available to students. Where the grade posting policy for this particular module is set is if I click into the grades area, I click on the cog icon up here, and I click into grade posting policy. Automatically post grades means everything is kind of made available to students as soon as I provide marks or provide feedback. Manually posting means grades will be hidden by default. Now, for current modules, manually post grades is the default setting. So we have applied that to all Canvas modules for this coming semester. And it is important to be aware of that because it means kind of, again, just with kind of security and integrity in mind, basically, when you provide marks and feedback to a student, when you enter in marks and feedback into Canvas, it's not made available in Canvas until you take the additional step of making that information available to students. So for the quiz that we created, this grades hidden quiz, I can see here kind of that the student has completed it, but that as identified by this icon up here, the grades are hidden. If I want to make the grades available, let's say all of the students have taken the quiz, I've given all of the marks and feedback, I'm happy to make their kind of grades and their feedback available to them. I can go into the grades area, I can click on the menu item for this particular column where the quiz is kind of presented, and I can select post grades. That will identify if I want to make them available to everyone or only the students whose work I have graded. I'm going to leave it at everyone. I'm going to select post. And we can see here now that the kind of eye with the kind of line through it icon, that has disappeared. And again, if we act as a student, we should be able to see the results of our quiz. So as a student, we go into the grades area and go and see here, quiz grades hidden. The score is now available, but it is important to be aware as well, if I haven't turned off the option to restrict student results view, they'll see their mark, but they're not going to be able to see what they got right or what they got wrong. And again, if you want, let's say, if you want students to be able to see the grade that they got, but you also want them to actually be able to see after the quiz is finished, what was the correct answer, what was the incorrect answer, you simply click into the quiz, we go down to the build area, and we have to go into the settings area and turn that off. So it is only now that students would be able to see the results, the mark that they got, but also what they answered correctly and what they answered incorrectly, and any kind of feedback associated with that. So in terms of additional considerations and questions, just a couple of general kind of key points, I guess, in terms of ensuring that quizzes are secure and safe and fair to all students. One of the key things is communicating the relevant information. And this sounds like quite a simple element, but it is really important, I think, that students are aware, okay, the quiz is going to be available only after Friday at 10, and it's going to finish, it's going to just shut up shop Friday at 12. So it's important to make students aware of that, just to avoid any confusion or students thinking they have more or less time than they do, or God forbid, not accessing the quiz when it becomes available. So in case they think it's the following Friday or the previous Friday. And I would say always try and double check the available from and until, as that really is determines when students can access the quiz and when it becomes unavailable to them. I'm sure you're sick of me saying it, but ensuring that you you select the button to restrict student results view. And again, the simple reason for this is that if that isn't selected, then after a student finishes a quiz, they're going to be able to see what answers they got right, what were the wrong answers, and they might potentially be in a position to share these with other students. So I would say this option is nearly the most important setting to ensure academic integrity. I would say randomizing questions can be a very useful kind of feature in terms of helping to limit collusion. You can shuffle questions, you can shuffle answers in the quiz setting. Within a particular question, you can also randomize how the answers are presented. And as we mentioned earlier, you can also pull from an item bank, which is a great way of presenting, I suppose, ensuring that kind of, different students will get different questions. They're all drawn from the same pool, but students will be presented with different questions accordingly. Yeah, and that's just that same point, that you can have the quiz draw from a random set of questions by using item banks effectively. Some supports in terms of quizzes and I guess kind of Canvas in general. I would say one of the key elements is the 24/7 telephone support inside in Canvas. So again, you can access 24/7 support if you're not sure on how to do anything in Canvas, or if you're having any difficulties with the system. Simply click on the help item over here, and there is the option to submit a ticket. There is phone support, and we would recommend web chat as the most kind of effective and efficient way of getting contact. So if at any stage you are stuck in any way inside in Canvas, that option is always available too, and it is a 24/7 service. We also have our own set of help articles at telhelp.eu.helpdocs.com, or if we simply go to tel.cit.ie, there is a link to that up at the top of the screen. So there are links in there to all of the different supporting kind of features. Excuse me, link to all of the different kind of support features that we have available. An additional element then is also inside in the site, we have some quite useful features, and in particular, the remote teaching downloads area can be particularly useful just for as kind of a reference guide, I guess, in terms of setting up assessments. So for example, if we go into remote teaching, if we go to remote teaching downloads, there are a number of PDFs available here, and of particular use, we think, in terms of quizzes and so on and so forth, is the assessment guidelines. So whatever type of assessment you're doing in Canvas, they provide kind of useful guidelines around, as identified there with Canvas quizzes, elements to be aware of, the process, security settings to be followed. There's also additional useful kind of shorter kind of one-pagers there around, for example, checklists for security, for assessment security and integrity, which just gives, again, just a few checks to be aware of for setting up a quiz or an assignment of some other type. We also have a kind of a student assessment guide set up. So this is essentially a course within Canvas which students can take. And the idea here is that students can basically, they can submit to a practice quiz, submit to a practice assignment, use the plagiarism detection system, so on and so forth. The idea is that basically students can be sent here ahead of taking an actual assessment, just to make sure that their computer, their browser is working correctly, and that kind of they can actually take the quiz or upload against the assignment without any difficulty. So no harm maybe as well to send students to that course, if at all possible. They should all have access to it, just to get them to test out their own systems. And again, it's just a way of trying to avoid technical issues arising on the day, which obviously causes tremendous stress for the students, and I'm sure for lecturing staff as well. So that is the end of the session for today. If there are any questions, either inside here in Zoom or on the YouTube channel, I'd be more than happy to answer those now. So I'm just going to shut up for a moment in case anyone does have any questions. Okay, I'm going to take that as no. So all that's left to do is to say thank you very much, everyone. We'll continue to roll out training over the course of the semester. And otherwise, thank you very much for taking the time to come along to the session today. And I look forward to talking to you.